So I was standing talking with Jack Street and Dave Street, who were cousins. I always have a hard time realizing which is of the Gordon Street family and the Bob Allen Street family. And I said, "It's your guys' turn." And they looked at each other and said, "No, it isn't." They said, "But Randy would be happy to do it." So Randy was a camper from 1980 to 1987. He was a camper in the leadership training program 24 years ago. We tried to get him back on staff. We realized that the secret to our success are all these people in their red shirts. They really make it happen. And we thought, if we really want to make it happen, we have to train them early. So the KILL program really is grooming our staff to become excellent counselors. Well, when Randy was ready to come back as a counselor, he had bigger fish to fry, and we couldn't get him back. But he went on to good things. He wrote a book, by the way, and you may look it up. It's called Who? Solving the #1 problem, which is hiring and interviewing the right people. I thought, man, that's just what Cheleys about, is hiring the right people. So Randy didn't have a choice with his dad and his uncle saying, "It's your turn." So Randy Street, we'd like to have you come up and reflect back on your camp experience.
Not quite sure how that request to speak this morning skipped a generation. But it is an honor to be here 24 years later. You know, interestingly, 24 years ago I was a kilt, and I was standing right here doing the "What Camp Means to Me" speech, which is interesting. And some of the folks who are in this crowd today were actually here 24 years ago as my fellow kilts and fellow campers. So it's absolutely fantastic to be back and to have this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you guys. I do have two girls who are at camp with me, who are campers, obviously. Laura, my oldest, is in Chipeta. Julie, my middle, is in Lower Chipeta, and my youngest daughter, Sarah, is anxiously awaiting the time when she can come to Cheleys. She's been studying the pictures on the website every night, looking for a glimpse of her sisters and an opportunity to come and be here herself. When I spoke 24 years ago, I talked about many of the same themes that the folks that you just heard from, the campers you heard from, just now spoke about. I talked about personal growth and character development. I talked about achievement, and I talked about friends and fun. And it's amazing as I think back now that I was able to do that, because if you think about these big themes of character and achievement and friendships and fun, I didn't want to have any part of it in 1980. I was 10 years old, and I was perfectly happy staying at home watching reruns of Gilligan's Island and Scooby-Doo. I didn't need to go to camp, thank you very much. But my mother insisted, my father insisted, "No, you're going to camp. Because you see, you don't behave very well. We're not sure we want you to come back." My mother said she was tempted to buy a one-way ticket with no return. So off I went. I guess I needed to come to camp, and I have to admit I was terribly homesick my first year of Lower Sky High. It was a very difficult year. First time I'd been away from home, and I was missing it. It was a very, very challenging time. Eating tortillas with bologna and hot sauce and squeezed grease in them could only take a kid so far. I wanted a home-cooked meal from my parents, but something started to happen. People started to encourage me. Campers and counselors alike would encourage me, and they started to push me, and they started to befriend me, and I realized I was having fun. I was having fun. So a year later, I came back. And I'm so glad I came back, because this world started to open up to me. And I came back to what I realized over the years was a community. This is a community. And it's a community that's governed by a code. You know, when Frank Cheley started this camp 91 years ago, he felt that it was very important for a community to develop its own standards, its own principles by which to live. And so he had the campers devise their own standards and principles. I don't know if it was called the Code of Living back then, but it's what is now the Code of Living. And like the campers from the 1920s and the campers today, I had the opportunity to develop and be a part of that process of creating a code. And it had words on it like integrity and honesty, respect, love. And it wasn't just words on a document. It actually was how we lived at camp. It's how we were. It's how we encouraged each other when we were climbing a difficult mountain that we didn't think we could make. It's how we helped each other when we were trying to overcome the fear of riding a horse for the first time. It's how we carried the load for one another as we were hiking on a long backpack and had to share in carrying the pots and pans and food and gear up the mountain. It's how we laughed and smiled and sang and hugged. The code was how we lived, and I realized the code was about building character. And that character was defined not by a series of words, but by every little single thing that we did, day in and day out. And as I reflect on that, it formed me. It became part of the fabric of who I am. In fact, 7 years ago, I was interviewing for a job, actually with a gentleman who I co-wrote that book with, Jeff Smart, and we were talking through my past, and Cheley came up. And we talked a little bit about how it was such an impactful part of my life. And he, later that night, shared that with his wife, Leslie. And she, as it turns out, just pure happenstance, had been a camper in Chipeta for 2 years. And she said, you already know where this is going. He went to Chile, you have to hire him. And he did. So there you have it. The code actually means something, but you know what? And what really brings it to life is this context that we're in, what Frank Cheley called God's handiwork, which is the mountains behind me. It's not just living the code in a vacuum. It's being a part of this amazing environment. It's doing it in the great outdoors, if you will. Frank actually used to say, great things happen when youth and mountains meet. And I learned that firsthand. The first time I climbed Flat Top in Howells, I was still in Lower Sky High. We made the top. It was one of my first climbs ever. And as we were coming down, actually before we started coming down, we could see the storms rolling in. And everyone here I know has experienced this, and we started hustling. And soon the counselors made the tough call, we've got to bushwhack. We've got to get down, we've got to get down fast. And soon the rain started coming, and we got wet. And then the hail, and that hurt. And then the lightning, and that was scary. And I don't know that I've ever been more scared and more cold and more nervous about things and more exhilarated than any time in my life. Because in that moment, I realized something. I could do this. I could do this. We were doing this together. And how cool is this? And Cheley offers patches and awards, and not everybody goes for them. There's no need to, because there's so much opportunity to accomplish even without them. But I realized personally, as many of you have, that you can push yourself here. And it's the first time in our lives that we have a chance to accomplish something that someone else isn't imposing on us. It's not a grade we have to make in school. It's not a parent saying, you must do this. We had a chance to do it because we wanted to do it. And we met self-motivation for the first time. We met self-directed accomplishment for the first time. And we did things we never thought possible for the first time. We pushed ourselves in ways we didn't think we could. Cheley taught me that success was not about some standard imposed by the world. It was about what I could do, what the best I could bring to the table was. That's success. Success is what you can do. It's living up to your very best, being the very best person you can be. The code of living and character, accomplishment. These things happened here, but what really happened was the friendships and the fun. My favorite memories from my entire life come from this place, and I had a hard time choosing what story shall I tell that will illustrate this, and I picked one from Eagles Peak. It was a tricky mountain. If you've been there, it's at the very southernmost part of the park. It's out of Wild Basin Ranger Station. We used to call it Wild Ranger, whereas I tell my daughters, Wild Ranger Basin Station. So we set out, and it's a long hike before you get to the top. And as you get close, you approach what's called Eagles Lake. It's actually at the base of the mountain. And we got there and we were exhausted. We were tempted not to go on. I had attempted this peak twice. I was kind of desperate to go, but you know what? The group was tired. I could respect that. I was tired that we kind of flopped down. So as we were resting there, we heard this sound. We all kind of sat up. We heard it was a little louder the next time. Marmot Marmots don't do that. And then it transformed to a new sound. I am the spiny-tailed Gila monster. Well, it turns out one of our colleagues decided that the best way to get us up the mountain was to laugh us up by being insanely silly. So he had brought the jungle and the spiny-tailed Gila monster to Eagle's Beak. And with new energy, we peaked this mountain and came back down full of the joy and just the exuberance that you have when you do something special like that with a group of guys. There were 16 of us. We joined our unit later that night, and we sang the songs of Campfire as we did every night. And I marveled once again that a group of 60 guys who probably never sang anything back at home could sound so good together when they were singing The Gambler or Taps or whatever it was in the night. One of those friends, a gentleman named John Campbell, he's actually not here, I don't think. He was planning to come up but couldn't make it. A fellow that I met in 1984, 85, we haven't been able to pin it down because you make such great friends here that it's hard to actually know when it started. Time just gets lost. He stood at my wedding and honored me with a chance to stand in his wedding. He was the first guy at my daughter Laura's birth. He was the first to the hospital. He and his wife were actually the first babysitters that we trusted with her. Eventually they moved back here, but you think about building meaningful relationships that last you a lifetime. I built those here. And he was one of many folks that I've stayed in touch with for 24 years. 24 years. While I've moved and he's moved and others have moved around the country, we've stayed in touch after all these years. And in some cases, we're being reunited here at Cheley for the first time after a quarter of a century. And it's an incredible thing. As a father, the memories of this place still resonate in my mind. I can still hear the campfire songs. In fact, when my kids were born, and I got really, really tired of singing The Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round. And by the way, for those of you who are parents, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who aren't yet, you'll know what I'm talking about. Here's a tip. The Chipeta song. The best lullaby ever written. My wife used to think I was trying to brainwash the girls. And you're just trying to get them to go to Cheley, aren't you? Like, yes, I am, as a matter of fact. I wanted the Chipeta call to one day call my girls back to this special community, and so far it's called 2 back with 1 more to come. And that's a great, great thing. And I watch now as a father as they experience the same thing that I experienced all those years ago. You know, Jeff talked about the challenge of living up to the legacy that has been left by Frank and Jack. And I have to tell you guys, you're doing a fantastic job of it, because I look at my daughters now, and they're having the exact same experience that I had all those years ago. And like every camper who's ever worn the blue kerchief, I marvel as I go back home and I watch as my daughters do things that are spontaneously in the right. Like every camper who's ever worn the blue kerchief, I marvel that they push themselves to do things that they never thought they could do. And like every camper that's ever worn the blue kerchief, I marvel at the friendships and the fun that they've had this summer and the summers past. Your friend Cheley had a vision 91 years ago, and we are all the beneficiaries of his leadership. And the highest calling in life is to love people, to love one another, to make a difference in people's lives. Think about the difference that happens here every summer, the friendships and the love that's shared here. Look at the difference that has been made in this community, the joy on these campers' faces, and the way they're living their lives differently now than they might have not ever set foot in this place. I'm different because of what Frank and Jack and Sis and Don and Carol, Jeff and Brooke, and the whole Cheley crew has done over the years. And you guys have created something unbelievably special. You've created a place where we can all learn who we are, grow in character, push ourselves to achieve things we never dreamed possible in the most beautiful place on earth. A place where we develop friendships and have more fun than we ever dreamed possible. And then 24, 25, 50 years later, we get to come back and watch as our kids have that same experience. So thank you very much to all of you, to everybody who has done so much to encourage our kids to make this such a special place. 25 years later, that's what camp means to me. Thank you.